Hello, my dear viewers. I'm Olga Demchuk, a researcher of the inner world of personality. Today we will talk about complex processes. Let's climb together to a higher level of abstraction. Today's topic is getting rid of badness, contempt, and, as a result, falling into oblivion. But we'll start this video with rotten potatoes. In order to truly feel and understand how we effectively get rid of these unpleasant feelings, these sensations of badness, let's carefully imagine that somewhere in our living space, perhaps on the balcony or within some dimly lit storage room, we have a significant quantity of potatoes thoughtfully stored away. And so you go there to carefully fry some delicious potatoes for yourself and your beloved family, and you suddenly find among all those various tubers a truly rotten potato. At that moment, inside us arises a kind of contemptuous attitude toward that potato. It's as if we become completely alienated from our very own selves. And we take that potato with that feeling of utter disgust, and then we promptly throw it into the trash. We absolutely must get rid of it. It is truly bad. But at the very moment of actual contact with that potato, what we actually do, in a profound psychological sense, is project. We project the deep-seated cause of our bad, negative, and often uncomfortable feelings directly onto that unsuspecting potato, as if it is the potato itself that inherently gives us these unpleasant feelings, as if its mere appearance forces us to experience them. In other words, if a person is an experienced explorer of the inner world, they understand that the potato has nothing to do with it. Even the disease in the potato is a form of life that is breaking through in that potato. That is, there's a kind of fungus there, struggling for its own life. And yet the feelings that arise are born within me. I am the source of these feelings. And I want to get rid of these feelings, so I get rid of the potato. Then those feelings also seem to stop existing inside me, and I sent it into oblivion. That's it. And my nervous system, my psyche, is back in balance again, and everything feels perfectly calm. Now let's move on to a more complicated example. For example, when I have a conflict with someone at work, it was quite intense, or maybe the conflict itself wasn't intense, but between me and someone else, a space of hostility arises. And if I don't realize that I'm the one generating these feelings when I encounter this colleague, then I'll end up blaming her for what I'm experiencing. In other words, it will seem to me that it's her presence that brings that cloud I sink into, and if my feelings become unbearable for me, I turn cold, distant, and emotionally frozen. That's when you want to go into a state of ignoring, when people play the silent treatment game. So when they deliberately ignore you and absolutely don't talk to you at all, playing this frustrating silent game with you, you inevitably feel a profound sense of unease and emotional distress, don't you? Your own non-existence, as if you don't exist. If no one notices me, then I don't exist. And now let's switch places, and we are the ones who are ignoring with silence. With this silence, it's as if we annul the other person. It's like we're sending them into non-existence, like tossing a potato into the trash. They simply don't exist. This particular state, the experience of emotions and the inability to truly claim these emotions as my own, my aggression, my hatred, it inevitably forces me to project these deeply unsettling and bad feelings onto someone else entirely. It's very much like a rotten potato, decaying and unpleasant. It's bad because it makes me feel bad, even though the potato itself is neutral, just lying there, not bothering anyone. It's not attacking us. It's exactly the same with this employee. He is just himself, living his own life. He's a bad employee because in his very presence, I consistently experience profoundly bad feelings. That is to say, I can freeze up, I don't feel anything, but still, my overall state remains utterly indifferent. I simply don't care what you are doing here at this moment. Or right now I just froze the feeling that I can't bear. Or I say, you're bad, so I don't want to have anything to do with you. I'm making this emotional break. I send it into oblivion, label it as bad, and then I feel no guilt for having annihilated, nullified, destroyed it. Now let's look at this example from another angle. Remember when you were walking and some beggar or homeless person asked you for help? Yes, asked for money. Give me some money. Could you give me some money? At that moment, we are confronted inside with a storm of emotions. A powerful storm. On one hand, it is truly unbearable for us, because a truly huge number of deeply personal associations and memories inevitably come up and surface within us. Like, how is it for this person? How alone he is. And we start to imagine ourselves in his place as if we are in that role. We can't perceive him separately. And inside, certain memories or a sense of abandonment may suddenly wash over us. In other words, we are not reacting to this person, but our psyche starts to intensely generate a large number of emotions. And in order to completely stop this destructive generation, we deliberately distance ourselves from him. We intentionally make him utterly indifferent to us, as if we don't care about him at all. We freeze ourselves, we completely freeze our feelings, and only at that precise moment can he truly start to become utterly indifferent to us. Become indifferent to us. But we can label him as bad. Remember, like with the potatoes, like with the employee. He's bad, so I have the right not to help. He's bad, so I can distance myself from him without feeling guilty. In other words, the feelings I generated, I projected onto him. My feelings are generated somewhere inside me, and I take them and shift the responsibility for them onto the potato, the employee, or the beggar. Here's another example, even more complicated. We're moving higher and higher, like we're climbing up the mountain to a higher level of abstraction in order to understand the commonality of things that at first glance seem completely unrelated to each other. When someone tells you, for example, about their illness, or perhaps says they've been deeply deceived by cunning scammers, or even talks about a profound loss, at that very moment we experience a truly huge and complex range of emotions. We rarely manage to listen to others without trying it on ourselves. Even a beggar, we immediately imagine ourselves in their place, and that's why we have so many feelings. An employee we're in conflict with, we don't perceive them as a separate person. We see them as a threat to ourselves, and that's why we have so many feelings. Even a potato lying there, we don't see it as a separate form of life that's trying to break through. We perceive everything in relation to ourselves, and that's why we have so many feelings. So, for example, an acquaintance tells us that they're sick or that they've been deceived. Our psyche instantly tries it on ourselves, starts to experience a storm of emotions, and unable to withstand this storm, we might freeze up. That is, we create this sense of detachment so that we don't have to worry or feel pain. I think each of you, let's switch places now so we can have a well-rounded perspective. Has experienced a moment when you share something deeply personal with someone close to you and they either shut down emotionally or blurt out something inappropriate. And it kind of hurts, like I shared, I opened up, and they reacted that way because the person can't handle their own feelings that come up. They freeze up, stop being empathetic, stop being in touch. And that's why it's inappropriate. This inappropriateness hurts us, especially when we open up and are vulnerable. Let's now put all of this together. So, each and every one of us has a certain inherent tolerance for emotional tension. People who are too egocentric, who relate everything to themselves, think, they're saying this to me, the potato is attacking me, the coworker is hostile toward me. The beggar wants something from me, I feel guilty, and on top of that, you attack me with your stories about your problems. Such a person will experience an enormous number of emotions. In other words, the more egocentric a person is, the more they relate everything to themselves, the more intense their emotional reactions will be. But you can find a rotten potato without getting emotional about it at all, and still do all the same things. However, the greater the degree of egocentrism, the less developed and mature the personality is. That is to say, if they haven't successfully broken out of this restrictive and limiting cycle, the fewer opportunities they seem to have to experience profound feelings and emotions, because those feelings are often far too intense and overwhelming for them to process. They are constantly overloading themselves emotionally. And if they can't take ownership of these feelings, they project the cause onto someone else. The other person is labeled as bad or overwhelming. Even people who give compliments become bad because the psyche loses its balance and the person can't handle their own emotional intensity. Even deep, heartfelt conversations are unbearable for such a person. They can only interact on a superficial level because they can't withstand their own intensity. This also affects the depth of their thinking. Those people who emotionally overload themselves cannot think deeply, because that too is an experience of feelings. Now let's take another step. Let's go even higher. And now just imagine for a moment that I have an ideal self, and I effectively contain, much like in a garbage bag, all of the truly undesirable and negative things that exist in my actual real self. I observe this phenomenon in various groups, and I also observe this in deep psychoanalytic sessions, particularly when a person begins to harshly berate themselves, criticizing their own actions and character. How disgusting I am, how terrible I am, what a beast I am. And it seems like the person is genuinely upset and experiencing emotions, but in reality they are flogging their real self, which they've turned into a garbage bag where they put everything bad. And many people watch videos, go to personal psychotherapy, but it's as if nothing changes, because all the bad things they learn about themselves are packed into that bag, while the person themselves remains spotless, in a white room, white and beautiful. This habit of blaming others for all your feelings, instantly shutting down without figuring out what's going on with yourself. Not paying attention to your own egocentrism and the desire to relate everything to yourself plays a cruel joke. You become like a puppet. You become emotionless. A person even manages to turn their own reflection into that garbage bag. That is, when someone looks at and hates their own reflection like it's a potato. In other words, they reject themselves. For example, they discover envy within themselves, and they reject themselves because they can't bear this truth about who they are. And this rejection plunges the very personality into non-existence. I wanted to plunge the potato into non-existence. I wanted to plunge the employee, the beggar, into non-existence, but it turns out that I myself end up in non-existence. It seems to me that I am annihilating the other, but in reality I freeze myself out and end up in non-existence myself. That is, if there is no sensory experience of the world, a person feels as if they are not living, as if they are a puppet, as if their life is not happening to them. They are in non-existence. And sometimes we plunge ourselves into non-existence when we scroll through social media feeds, when we play some primitive games, when we watch some primitive TV series. We immerse ourselves in this non-existence. And then there is no sense that you are alive. There are no emotions, no sensory experience of the world. You can't even sit through a video. For example, something like this. Shutting down the inability to experience feelings because there are too many of them when you are immersed in subjectivity and egocentrism. It's impossible to teach, impossible to comprehend, impossible to run a business because there are too many feelings. A person chooses a workload that matches exactly the amount of emotional overwhelm they can't bear. That is not a technical limit, but an emotional one they can't handle. Why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you this so that, for example, when you share something with others and they shut down, you understand what's happening to them, at least for that reason. I've observed in groups when a client shares their story, others can't handle it and start spouting nonsense, just utter nonsense in response. And the person sharing gets hurt and doesn't understand why people are saying these things. But people simply can't handle their own feelings. Then you'll understand what's happening to you when you see something that's unbearable for you. You generate your own feelings and you reject what's unbearable in order to calm yourself down, to stop generating those feelings. This will help you take ownership of it, and especially to take ownership of your own badness. We tend to call things bad when we don't understand them. Speak more clearly, it's easier for me. You're talking nonsense. If I don't understand, you're talking nonsense because the person has withdrawn into alienation and even labeled me as bad, saying that I'm overwhelming them, that I'm not saying things the way they want. This kind of understanding will gradually expand your tolerance. Then you'll start to understand cause and effect, take ownership, and your world will become richer. And you'll have a completely different sensory connection with the world, as if a huge number of colors that were previously inaccessible will appear, and you'll gain a sense of being. I'm going to wrap up now. Write down your insights, which thought was the most interesting for you, and try to develop that thought further, either in the comments, as I asked to support my channel, or in your own journals. I invite you to leave a like as a way of saying thank you for what I share here. It helps create a sense of exchange between us. And I'd also like to let you know that we're planning to start translating recordings of our webinars. They take place about once a month, and anyone who wishes can then watch the recording. And of course, I'd love for you to subscribe to this channel, where we explore our inner world and learn how to build relationships with ourselves and others. I say goodbye to you. See you next time.